kind. Heal the sick, the captive free. Let us all rejoice in thee. Let us all rejoice in thee.
Good morning. It is good to see each of you here this morning as we begin our day sessions for the Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development Lectureship, the year 2024. Our theme for this year is Jesus Christ, the center of the Bible. And the topics are going to center around looking at Jesus in each of the 27 books in the New Testament. And our speaker this morning is Brother Drew Kranawetter, who is a first-year student coming to us from Missouri. He is a graduate of the Southeast Missouri State University and actually holds a degree in agribusiness, but decided that he would rather preach the gospel than work in farming, which is a good thing. It's sowing the seed in a different way, one that is much more beneficial for those in the world. And this morning, he is going to be bringing us a study from the book of John. It is entitled, "In John, Jesus is the Son of God." Brother Drew.
Morning. It's kind of funny, you get up on the stage and your heart starts beating a little faster in your chest. You can feel it. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. It's very kind. Something I'm new to, so I appreciate that a lot. Jeff Johnson and I joke about whether being first on a day is a good thing or a bad thing. And it's good for me because I get to get up here and get mine out of the way, get my nerves out of the way, and just, well, not wait all day. But it's good for you guys, too, because you guys may get another hour of sleep. So, I mean, it's a win-win for us, yeah? But in all seriousness, like Chris kind of mentioned, this is a sentimental moment for me. Last lectureship is where I met some of my best friends and a lot of great brothers and sisters I look up to very much. So this is important for me as much as it is for you guys as well. And like Chris said, I would say it's probably the highlight of my life so far, minus obeying the gospel. But getting to actually preach it, I can't think of something that's more necessary or as important that I get to do. So I think that's really awesome and something very special that lectureship gives to me. Now, like Chris said, my topic or my theme, my book is John. With Jesus, he is the Son of God. And John's gospel really comes to a focal point in John 20:30-31, which says, "And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." But before we get into the actual content of what was written, I want to take a step back and build a strong historical defense and lay some groundwork for the claim that Jesus is the Son of God. So before we get into the meat of John's gospel, we're going to look at the apologetic side of it, which is the intellectual defense of the Christian religion. 1 Peter 3:15 would say, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear." And consider the first half of Proverbs 15:28. "The heart of the righteous studies how to answer." So part of our 21st century defense is having good, well-rounded answers on all our apologetics questions. So this is a necessary piece of information to know. We'll look at 3 Roman witnesses, and they're considered hostile because they actually wrote against Jesus and the things associated with him. So they were anti-Christian. They are Tacitus, Suetonius, and Pliny the Younger. And again, this is just to give us a good, strong historical footing for the claim that Jesus is the Son of God. It'd be like calling or having a court case that you could call an unbiased witness to for the plaintiff or the defendant. If you can give a good, strong testimony for the case that you're presenting or arguing for, well, that obviously helps you out a lot. The first one is Tacitus. He was around from AD 56 to AD 117. He's a well-educated man, which allowed him to hold some very high, lofty positions in society with great responsibility. And one of those was being the right-hand man to Roman emperors Nerva and Trajan, and his work was called Annals. It was a brief history of Rome from AD 115. This is the work that included Emperor Nero, the one we hear about a lot, who burned our brethren at the stake. And this is a quote from that work. Nero fabricated scapegoats and punished them with every refinement the notoriously depraved Christians, as they were called. Their originator, Christ, had been executed in Tiberius' reign by the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. But in spite of this temporary setback, the deadly superstition had broken out afresh, not only in Judea, where the mischief had started, but even in Rome. Again, this is just our first witness giving us evidence that Jesus and the claim that he was the Son of God and believers of that claim were in fact real. Our next witness is Suetonius, or Suetonius. His writings were around from 120 AD, and he has a work called The 12 Caesars. And there's two quotes we'll look at, and this is the first one. Because the Jews at Rome caused continuous disturbance at the instigation of Chrestus, which is more than likely just a misspelling for Christ, Claudius expelled them from the city. But this fact would be echoed in Acts 18:2 in the latter half. And this is Paul. And he, Paul, found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome, and he came to them. So again, we just have historical records harmonizing with the biblical record, giving credibility to our claims. And his last quote was, punishments were also afflicted on the Christians, a sect professing a new and mischievous religious belief. So Suetonius, like Tacitus, had nothing good to say about our beliefs, but he affirms that the believers of Jesus as the Son of God were, in fact, real. And our last witness is Pliny the Younger. He was around from 110 to 111 AD, or not, sorry, let me rephrase that. Through 110 to 111 AD, he had a specific role that we'll look at. He governed the affairs of the region of Bithynia under Roman Emperor Trajan. And he wrote a letter back to the Emperor Trajan with the following content. It included the word Christian 7 times, included the word Christ 3 times as well. This is a quote on how he handled people professing Christianity. In the meanwhile, the method I have observed towards those who have been denounced to me as Christians is this. I interrogated them whether they were Christians. If they confessed it, I repeated the question twice again, adding the threat of capital punishment. If they still persevered, I ordered them to be executed. And this is a quote he has about the Christians themselves. The whole of their guilt, or their error, was that they were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God, and bound themselves by solemn oath not to any wicked deeds. So again, none of these men believed that Jesus was the Son of God, and none of them really supported the claims, but they did believe that he was a real person, but not his identity or who he was. Again, tying this back into John 20, 30 to 31, and truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So again, we're just trying to give credibility to John's gospel and the entire work or book of the Bible that claims that Jesus is the Son of God. And for our first part of the content of the meat of John's gospel, we'll look at the who or what was Jesus in John's gospel. That's really the foundation of our belief, the crux of the matter for our lectureship, or mine, if you will. And John's gospel has that really unique beginning that doesn't start with the linear earthly origins like Matthew and Luke do, where we see the virgin birth into the boyhood and the ministry and manhood of Jesus. In the beginning, we get, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:1, he's sort of just there, and that Word became flesh and dwelt among us in John 1:14, which really parallels the Genesis account. We ask the question, why does he start his gospel in such a unique way, and why does he specifically name Jesus as the Word? He could have just said, in the beginning was Jesus, in the beginning was the Lamb, in the beginning was the Christos, the Messiah, the Amen, all the other various titles we have for Jesus. But I think he gives us he does that for a reason. He gives us a hint to what Jesus' purpose and what he was on earth. Consider with me Revelation 19:13. This is John writing about Christ. It says, "He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God." So we get that the name itself is also another title of Jesus intended to carry along a specific meaning. And we take a broad look at words. Words are vehicles for conveying thoughts, ideas, or messages, and those in turn make up a language. It's how we know and converse with people outside of ourselves. And language is exclusive. No other animal or plant can develop their own original language. They're endowed with them from their creator. They have their utterances and mating calls and what have you. But only God can create new ones. And since we're made in his image, we develop that right as well. We have that intellectual capacity to form new styles of communication. But all that in mind, and that broad picture painted, it gives us a good understanding of why Jesus is specifically called the Word in John's Gospel. Hebrews 1 would even make this point. He's the Word from God, the communication, the language, the what have you that God gives to man. Hebrews 1, 1-3. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and express image of his person. That last phrase there, express image of his person, was actually used in the Septuagint for a stamp or for a stamp on an instrument or an impression. So really Jesus is the mark of God on the world. And as the Word, Jesus gets the right to communicate fully God's judgments, passions, and heartaches, and all that there is to be known about God, which is an exclusive office. No other entity was fit to do so. No man alone, no angel alone, but only Jesus. I think as Robbie Sr. pointed out last night, the man God is the only person who has that right, which in this case is Jesus. Because of John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. God is choosing to communicate to us something through the Word. He is showing us how much he loves, cares, and values his creation. And in his eyes, considering the cross of Christ and the story of Jesus, it tells us that we are worth suffering for as his creation. But in the same message that it gives to us, that also allows us to reciprocate that same feeling to God, that he is a God worth seeking, serving, and loving, and enduring any hardship we face as well. And there was a great type that displays this role of Jesus, of connecting man to God in John's Gospel. Consider with me John 1:43-51. This is Jesus on his way to Galilee, and he asked Philip to come with him. Well, Philip would go to find his brother, Nathanael, proclaiming to have found the Messiah. But Nathanael doubts this, which leads Christ to say that he saw him under a fig tree. Nathanael is naturally amazed that he knows this and exclaims that Jesus is the King of Israel. Jesus goes on to say, though, that he would see even greater signs than these, and in 1:50-51, that he would see the heavens open and the angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man, which was a callback to Genesis 28. Here we have Jacob fleeing Esau, journeying to meet Laban and receive a wife. And on that journey, he comes to rest at a place called Luz. Naturally, because he's weary from his journey, he takes a pillow or a stone pillow and dreams a dream. And in that dream, he sees the angels ascending and descending a ladder stretching from the earth to the heavens. And he would call that ladder the gate of heaven, the way into God's realm. So Jesus calls back to this dream, signifying his function. He is that ladder connecting man on earth to God above in heaven. And the place where, this is also another picture of the church I think is very fascinating that Bill really liked, which was a great compliment to me. But the place where Jacob rested at was called Luz at the time. But that would go on to be renamed Bethel, with the etymology house of God. So we get a picture of the house of God being connected to heaven through the ladder, which is Christ. It's another picture of the church. Can never have enough water, right? But our next point will be the purpose of Jesus in John's Gospel. We'll look at John 5:1-17, where a man was healed on the Sabbath by the pool of Bethesda by Jesus. This is the text of a man who had an infirmity for 38 years. He had been waiting to dip into the pool, but was always beaten to it by another person. Jesus helps the man by miraculously healing his disability, which would lead to persecution from the Jews because they considered this a violation of the Sabbath. And the way it worked before the miracles is that angels would come down from heaven and stir up the waters of the pool, Bethesda. And the first person to step in into their waters would be healed of their affliction. Take that part with a grain of salt, though, because the Nestle Allen Greek New Testament manuscripts don't include it. Not to doubt its validity, but not all manuscripts have it, is what I'm getting at. But regardless, that's not really important right now. The miracle was all done in the same area as the sheep gate, if you'll notice also in John 5:1. The sheep gate was a doorway in the wall of Jerusalem, which led to the markets where sheep were sold for temple sacrifice. The pool of Bethesda then was actually a washing pool for the animal before its sacrifice, is the best I found from my study. And the sheep's gate was actually rebuilt in Nehemiah 3:1 after Israel's Babylonian exile. Nehemiah had heard word that Jerusalem must be rebuilt and leaves King Artaxerxes. Through constant prayer and assistance from God, Nehemiah is able to return to Jerusalem and repair the walls of the city in around 444 BC. With the wall around Jerusalem then built by Nehemiah, there's protection. There's also 10 other gates built. However, the sheep gate is special from all other gates. Nehemiah 3:1 says it was the only gate that was consecrated and set apart for the Lord. Its building was also the only one conducted by the high priest Eliashib. And the sheep gate is distinct from all other gates and has a unique background to it, which will come into play later, if you will. So again, back in John 5, we're looking for the purpose of Jesus, but we find an allegory in that purpose for our conversion and our spiritual healing. There's a few lines of dialogue that really kind of show this point, if you will. Verse 5-6 says, Christ asked, "Do you want to be made well?" Well, what kind of question was that? Of course the man wanted to be made well. Of course he wanted to be healed of his disease. Why would he ask that question? It would say later on in verse 6 that he had been in that condition for a long time. And in verse 7, that he had been trying to enter the pool, but was never able to reach the waters first. So obviously Jesus knew the man wanted to be healed, but still chooses to ask rather than to just do. Well, why? Because salvation from God, in a physical sense or spiritual sense, is a free gift that we still have to choose to accept. Titus 2:11 says, "The grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men." The gift of salvation is offered to everyone, the poor, the rich, the blind, the sick. It is our choosing to accept Christ as Lord and as the Son of God and believe that he is able to do what he offers, whether that be in the miraculous sense of a physical healing for that man or in the miraculous sense of a spiritual healing for us, that determines what happens to us in the future. Verse 7, the man replied, "Sir," to Christ, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, or while the water is stirred up." That's the right verse. Yeah, okay, I'm right, sorry. Verse 7, he replied, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." And it shows a spiritual truth to us, if you will. When we reach that age of accountability, we become sick like the man. We need help overcoming our problems, in our case, our sickness, sin. We are helpless to adequately deal with the problem of sin. And like him, we may know and try the right thing to do to try to desperately reach that pool, but we need someone to help guide us, to help us reach where we want to go. We need Christ in the same way the sick man needed him. Too many times we're actually like the sick man, trying to handle our problems by ourselves. We have to realize that we need Christ and the help he is willing to offer and give us. When we don't go to the source that we've been given to help us fight our battles, we're not actually living as a child of his in the way we're not living Christianity the way it was designed to be done. We have to ask ourselves, am I willing to give Christ my problems? Am I willing to help him or let him help me in my life through word and prayer? Am I actually willing to surrender to him as Lord and accept that he is able to do what he says. John 14:6 would say, or Jesus would say in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to me, or no one comes to the Father except through me. And also John 1:16, it says that we have received, or of his fullness we have received grace for grace. So Christ brought grace and righteousness that is sufficient through faith in him to deal with our problems. We have to realize that he is the way to fight our spiritual sickness and wants all of us to have a godly, holy life for him. Verse 11, shifting gears, Christ would say, take up your bed and walk. To that man, that was a foreign idea. He had been handicapped for 38 years. Telling him that would have seemed impossible from man's side, but not from the divine side. This shows by following his command, or by following the command, that he had faith that Christ was able to do the impossible, even though he didn't fully understand everything about the identity of Jesus, as evidenced by verse 13. We ought to be the same way. If we find solutions to our problems or our struggles in the Word of God, that we can't quite understand or can't quite comprehend at that moment, which happens all the time if we're real, I'll be honest, we have to remember to trust God that he can deal with our problems and knows the remedies for our hardships, even if in that moment it seems like something we've never been able to understand or something we've never been able to overcome or something we've never been able to see anyone else do, if you will. I'm not advocating for miraculous gifts today. I'm just advocating for the efficacy of the Word. We have to trust that the written living Word has the same power and effectiveness in our lives today as the living fleshly Word did back in the first century. Verse 14, it would go on to say that Jesus found him in the temple, the sick man, or the healed sick man, and said to him, see, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest the worst thing come upon you. Based off that last line there, lest the worst thing come upon you, it seems to indicate that maybe there was somehow a dynamic between that man's sin and his ailment. You can disagree, but I'll give you my evidence as to why I think that is. This is not like the blind man in John 9. There in that context, the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents? But John 9:2 would say, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? But Jesus replies, well, no one did. Unfortunately, he had his disease naturally. He was just a case where the works of God were displayed in him. Again, you can disagree with me on that, but I think you'll agree with me on my next point, that the man had a disposition of gratefulness and faithfulness after his healing, after coming into contact with Christ. He was found in the temple afterwards, either offering up his Sabbath day offering, or required by Numbers 28, 9 through 10, Numbers 28, 9 through 10, or thanking God and praising him for the healing that he had experienced. We should have that same mind, and we can have that same mind of awestruck worship through what Christ has done for us. And what an awesome God we have. Because of the full grace that has been bestowed upon us, we can confidently walk to the temple, the dwelling place of God, and praise our God. And if you'll remember, I brought up the sheep gate from earlier in John 5:1 for a reason. That was a holy and unique gate built by the high priest that was essential for allowing Jews to buy their sacrificial sheep and to please God. It's another type of Christ, if you will. And this ties into our text through John 10. In this dialogue, Jesus would declare that he would gather into one all the sheep, into one flock, all the sheep of God. And Jesus would say that he functions as the gate, as the doorway for us. This is John 10, 7 through 9, specifically verse 9. Most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. So quickly in recap, Jesus is the message of God, or message from God to man, and is purposed with being able to fully heal a spiritually sick people that hope to be with their Creator. Now our next point, I'm going really good on time. All right, sweet. Our next point, we'll look at the miracles of Jesus, right? It wouldn't be a lectureship sermon on John if I didn't go over the miracles and the works of Christ. And we'll try to build a defense for them as well. Rather than preach through them specifically and what they were, we're going to go back to the apologetics and just try to build a strong defense and close off that way. Christ said in John 10:37-38, "If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. Believe the works, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him." So part of our belief is that we believe that what was written is true and that everything in the gospel were real events. Well, naturally, we're forced to conclude then that includes the supernatural, the miraculous, which is a sticking point for a lot of people that they simply cannot get over. So again, we're going to try to build a strong defense of what was written and the works that Jesus did that gave evidence to him as the Son of God. Our first point, consider that the miracles were done in a variety of places in front of a variety of people. We'll look at water into wine in Cana of Galilee in John 2, and then the healing of the paralytic in Luke 5. At the wedding, there were 6 water pots that held about 20 to 30 gallons of water apiece, which were turned into new wine, giving us a range of about 120 to 180 gallons. It's not really that important. But this wine was supplied in addition to wine that had already been drank by the guest. So if we look at just the new wine, which is the only information we have from the text, and we assume that this is very liberal, we assume one person drinks a half gallon of that new wine, and we go with the lowest amount possible of the wine supplied, which is 120 gallons, we'll get enough wine for at least 240 people at that wedding. And I would argue that's a very, very generous number, considering we're not even talking about the old wine that was in effect, or going to the high range of the 180. Also, most average people probably won't drink a half gallon of juice, just saying. But hey, what do I know? But let me make it clear what I'm arguing. I'm not arguing that everyone at the wedding knew it was Jesus. That's not the point of this text exactly. The text even explicitly says that the disciples and the servants knew that Jesus did it in verse 9-11, and the bridegroom didn't have knowledge that it was Christ, which holds true in other miracles like John 5. He had performed that miracle and slipped away, and not everyone knew the public knowledge that Jesus had done that miracle. That's 5:13. But I am arguing that Jesus' miracles were not done in a closed system with a closed select group of witnesses, but were done in an open variety of places with a variety of people giving us a variety of witnesses. Look at the healing of the paralytic in Luke 5. For context, this is the account of the man who had to be lowered in through the roof of a house because there was such a great crowd around the place that Jesus was in that they could not physically get in through the doorways to where Christ was. Additionally, before this event, Jesus had been building popularity that was able to draw great multitudes to him. We'll look at Luke 5:1. This is after the preaching of the synagogues, I believe, in Galilee. Don't quote me on that, though. Luke 5:1 says, "So it was that the multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret. Jesus would go on to preach to those from the shore, or on the shore from a boat, and have a great multitude of fish be caught, which would give him his first 4 disciples. It's also worth noting the account after this. This is the one Robbie Sr. used last night. The healing of the paralytic in Luke 5:12-16. We see a leper, not paralytic. We see a leper being healed, and Jesus charging the leper to tell no one. Wouldn't you know it, though, that the leper told people? That's just crazy, right? Luke 5:15. However, the report went about concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. And this brings us to 5:17, the account we're looking at. Now it happened on a certain day as he was teaching that there were Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting by who had come out of every town of Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them. So because of his fame was so great, he was able to have recognition from people all over the region of Palestine, except for maybe Samaria, but that's debatable as well. Except for maybe Samaria, But Palestine itself was around 10 to 12,000 square miles. For comparison, our state of Maryland is between 9,775 to 12,406 square miles. So the extent and reach and where witnesses could be found for Christ and his person, and by implication his miracles, was an area that would have been about as big as our 42nd largest state. Also consider this, that miracle was done in Capernaum, as evidenced by Mark 2, and Capernaum to Jerusalem was about 125 miles from what I gathered. Now, Chattanooga, Tennessee to Albany, Kentucky, which is essentially just a straight northern comparison, like it's southern border of Tennessee, Chattanooga. If you go straight north, you'll run into Albany, Kentucky, is around 140 miles. So the distance that Jesus was able to be known was essentially the entire vertical extent of Tennessee. That's how far people would have traveled to at least maybe come into contact with him. Again, Albany, Kentucky to Chattanooga is 140. Capernaum to Jerusalem is 125. His fame would have been so popular that even the Gentiles heard of it as well. This is John 12, 20 to 21. Now, there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast, and they came to Philip and said, they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Somehow Gentiles had even heard of this man called Jesus, and the power of his witness extended beyond just the land of Palestine. Again, all this proves that people from every walk of life heard and sought the fame of Jesus and provided us a witness for him. It is unlikely this happens if the miracles are simply a hoax. Again, our next point, Jesus worked wonders that were unique and not being duplicated today. This is a special, There's a special element of Jesus' miracles in that they were unique, and some of them were never done by anyone else ever. Consider John 9:32. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. And today, we have scientists creating great health advancements. We have cancer being cured. We have fertility enhancements. We have medicine for cystic fibrosis. But no faith healer, scientist, or any other modern man has been able to duplicate what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. And if we look at the faith healers of today, there are endless events in those major cities, New York, LA, wherever, where prophets will come in from overseas and perform some type of healing or exorcism or some miraculous action, all while building their financial empire. But all of them would say, if you listen to their actual sermons, they'll say they had to disappear after performing their miracles. They would say they cannot let their power be known for one reason or another. I don't know, it's besides me. But that leads us with no eyewitnesses of them actually performing a miracle. But the witnesses we have from the gospel writers, we see Jesus' supernatural powers were limitless, and unlike anything any so-called prophet is attempting to persuade us of today. Matthew 9:35 says that Jesus went about all cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease. Nothing was outside of his power or authority. And consider this list. This is not an exhaustive list, but we'll get the idea of what I'm getting at. He had power over affliction, healing the royal man's son in John 4, the lame man at the pool of Bethesda in John 5, and the man born blind in John 9. Again, John 9:32 says, it is unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. He had power over nature, water into wine, John 2, the feeding of the 5,000 with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, John 6, the walking on water in John 6, and the 153 fish caught at the Sea of Tiberias in John 21. He had power over demons, the man in the synagogue, of Capernaum in Mark 1, the mute demon-possessed man in Matthew 9, and the 2 men at Gadara in Matthew 8, and power over death with widow of Nain's son in Luke 7, Jairus' daughter in Matthew 9, and Lazarus, John 11, and then his eventual resurrection in every gospel account. Again, his power and the expression of that power were truly unique and unlike any modern equivalent, whether that be prophets or modern medicine or any other placeholder we want to throw in there. That's what I'm getting at. Our next point will be that the enemies of Jesus confirmed the works. It would be one thing if only the disciples attested to Jesus' power, right? We would expect that. But for his enemies to affirm that, well, that gives a whole new level of credibility to our claim. After the resurrection of Lazarus in John 11:47 would say that the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, "What shall we do? For this man works many signs." These were people dedicated and passionate to their cause. The last thing they would want to do is to acknowledge the realness of Jesus' miracles and his power and his claim to deity. Consider also Matthew 12. Jesus healed the blind, deaf, and mute man, and the Pharisees said he was performing this work by the authority of Beelzebul. They were so crossed up in his miraculous ability that they heap up an excuse that doesn't even make sense, and Jesus points that out. Why would Jesus cast out demons? That's the exact opposite of what Satan, the destroyer of man, would want to do. That doesn't make any sense. And all of this leads to the Pharisees creating an extermination movement because the miracles were so potent and effective. So to say that the miracles were fabricated also then is to say that the Pharisees' genuine grief and fear struck into them was fabricated as well. They were on they had a fear that was a vision and a hallucination, or they were just on some really strong peyote. I don't know. A second example is a little different than the Pharisees, but it was Herod Antipas, the crucifixion Herod. This is Luke 23:8. This is after Pontius Pilate found no wrong and declared Jesus as having nothing against him. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Herod was not a devout Jew, but rather was just a political figure of the time. And it says that the Pharisees and scribes stood by and accused him at his sentencing. It's not a strong case to think that Herod himself was a Pharisee. But even he requested that a sign be done for him. Why would he ask for that? He didn't ask it to get rid of those annoying Pharisees. He asked it because he probably believed there was real evidence that Jesus had the power to work an actual miracle. Again, these people did not believe in Jesus' teachings, like our witnesses from earlier, but even they could not deny Jesus' authority over the supernatural. Next point, Jesus' miracles were done, were recorded by a variety of writers. It's no surprise that no one takes a story with only one writer or only one witness seriously. Sometimes we're even baffled that someone would believe a story with only one witness. We kind of almost think less of them sometimes out of their naivety. And it's fairly consistent with all people that we all behave that way. Regardless of theology, we agree that we have to have multiple witnesses or multiple testimonies to take something as credible and as serious. So consider the feeding of the 5,000 is in every gospel. It's in John 6, Matthew 14, Mark 6, and Luke 9. They aren't word-for-word copies of one another. They have different links and have some nuance to each one of them, but that actually strengthens their case. If you have 4 kids tell you their testimony of something that happened, there's 2 options. They can tell you the exact same story with the same details, the same ending, the same everything. And what do you think of that story? It's fishy. It's not credible. It's planned or staged. But if you have 4 kids tell you a story with the same ending, with different details and different point of views, what do you conclude then? Well, it's a genuine, real story. It's credible. It's believable. And we should ask that same question for the Gospels. Do they fit that mold? Are they written in a way that's realistic and consistent with real-life witnesses and testimonies? And they are. The Gospel accounts of Jesus and his miracles are written how we would expect them to be written. They're not the same exactly word for word, but they're consistent with one another and they harmonize. That's the strongest way to attest of anything, regardless of what it is, religious or not. And our last 2 points here will be that we'll look at two non-inspired sources who wrote of Jesus' miracles. The first one is Josephus, the first century Jewish historian. He wrote the 20 books of Jewish antiquity, the 7 books on Jewish war, the 2 books against Apion. And this is one of his quotes from his works. He said that Jesus was a doer of wonderful works and who drew over to him many of the Jews and Gentiles. And he used the word paradoxa. And it's the same word he used to describe the various works of Elijah and his miracles. And our New Testament uses this word in Luke 5:26, where the paralytic was healed, and it says, "And they glorified God and were filled with fear, saying, 'We have seen a strange thing, paradoxa today.'" So Josephus uses the word paradoxa, describing the works of Jesus, which is the same word used to describe his miracles. And that's an uninspired historian affirming the canonical trueness of the miracles of Jesus. And our closing point will be over the Babylonian Talmud, which is a text used for text used by rabbis for Jewish theology. And this is a quote from that work. "On the eve of the Passover, Yeshu was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, 'He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed Israel into apostasy.'" The Talmud says that there was sorcery done by Jesus, and it's unclear of Josephus' belief, but throughout all of this and throughout all the witnesses we've examined, no one claims that they didn't happen. Rather, they claim that they can't believe in them. It's really the crux of the matter with the miracles of Jesus. And that's all I have. Thanks for listening, guys. Appreciate you.
Drew, you did a marvelous job. Thank you so much. Drew is in his 3rd quarter of his 1st year, and I am so anxious to hear your development over the years. You did a fabulous job. He evidenced study. He evidenced that you live with the text and you grapple with the text, and I know he has. He's been doing that for months. And here at the school, we are training gospel warriors. Drew has a heart for the lost. That's the reason why he came. He was in Missouri trying to evangelize, and he realized, I need more training. And so he has a passion for the lost, and he consequently has a passion for the gospel. We got just a minute, and we'll give you a break. I'm going to take advantage of this moment to tell you our top 5 priorities for the school, and you may hear this again. But it fits in with something that I want to say about Drew and the rest of our students that are speaking. Number 1, and it will always be number 1, is we are in the business to glorify Christ and His church, and everything has to run through that filter. Number 2, to take care of our students. And I just want to say this. We believe the biblical model to follow. Early on, we asked the question, if Jesus had a school of preaching, and He did, what would it look like? And part of it is putting our men to work and mentoring our men. And so, Drew, we appreciate you taking advantage of that. Number 3, take care of our alumni. It doesn't do any good to train a man and then don't look after him. We want to keep him in the pulpit. Number 4, and you can help with these next 2, recruiting students. We need men. We live in a messed up world that desperately needs the gospel. Number 5, fundraising. And I unabashedly say to you, if you have money, we will do our very best to use it in a very responsible way to spread the gospel. We exist to challenge this ungodly world, to challenge the status quo. We are here to change the world. That may seem bold, but we believe the Bible is right. That's the power of God unto salvation, and that's what this world needs. Drew, thank you so very much. We're going to take about a 14-minute break, and then let's assemble back in here. Let me mention this real quick. Room 3 on the other side, there's a bookstore. Drew Leonard has some great books. He's a very scholarly writer. Take advantage of those. He's got prices there. Brother Carl Cooper has brought a bunch of books, and they are also excellent, but his prices are much better than Brother Leonard's. Brother Cooper's books are free, and we appreciate him so very, very much. There's also a booth there from International Gospel Hour, and there's some free things there. So you are dismissed for about the next 14 minutes, and then we'll reassemble.